大家好，欢迎来到飞时财经。最近墙内又爆大新闻，多家银行在悄悄收缩长期负债，而且不是小修小补，这是赤裸裸的自救行为。当一家银行取消3年、5年期大额存单，市场应该警醒而不是庆幸。缩短负债期限意味着银行把风险和压力往明天甚至后天推，而把今天的现金保留下来。短期自保的逻辑很简单，先活下来再说其他。但这种先活下来的选择恰恰暴露出一个更大的问题，体系已经没有足够信心承担长期承诺。监管端给出的答案则是另一套剧本，用制度上的信用修复把失信主体拉回来。发改委的信用修复管理办法在字面上看是人性化的，但在实质上却像一味甜蜜的毒药，表面上告诉大家可以修复，可以重返市场，实际上给了失信者一条可以期待的再生路径。当制度成为了债务人逃避或延缓偿付的缓冲垫，债权人的合法权益就被系统性削弱。这种做法用一个词来形容最准确，饮鴆止渴。当一个企业或个人知道违约或选择性履约后还有修复的门路，那么还款和诚信的天平就会向短期投机偏斜。权力在此扮演了纵容者的角色，你可以暂时违约，政府会帮你擦屁股，市场会再给你机会。长此以往，谁还会把契约看得那么重要？银行选择下架长期存款，是市场机制在发出警报；监管选择放宽失信后果，是政府在用制度遮羞。这两手合起来看起来像是在编一张保险单，但保险单的细目写满了例外和灰色地带。今天的解法是，先让银行把短期现金留住，再让失信者通过修复回到资本市场，直到他们能够再借到钱去还钱。这是一个圆滑但危险的自洽叙事，把坏账的爆发点往后挪，把风险的代价均摊给社会，承担代价的往往是中小供应商、基层职工、无法获得资讯的散户以及没有影响力的债权人。体系性的宽容让弱者变成了承担风险的缓冲垫。发改委设定轻微失信为原则上不予公示，行业主管部门可决定是否公示，公示期也被设为可调节的短期。很多失信信息在被发现到被公开之前就已经被软着陆处理掉了。当失信信息不再可见，市场的价格信号就被扭曲，投资者和债权人无法做出真实的风险判断。这种有法不依的后果是深远的。法律和制度应该是信任的基础，而现在法律反而成为了信任的变相削弱者。从银行的角度看，短期行为是理性的，但理性并不等于无害。当理性被制度容忍，并且制度还给出消失风险的捷径时，整个金融体系的风险会被巧妙地外包给社会。这不是风险分散，而是风险转嫁。行政性救治在这里不是救命，而是掩盖病灶。真正有效的路径应该是强化破产法制化，完善债务重组机制，提高透明度，并保护中小债权人的权益，而不是在问题出现时就用行政手段把黑箱关上，寄希望于一纸修复来消解责任。这种饮鸩止渴的做法对经济的长期健康是背叛，对法治和契约精神是腐蚀。许成刚教授提醒我们，没有法治和透明度的救市只是伪修复，会把风险从今天推向未来，而非根治。制度的力量在于建立可预见的游戏规则，而不是临时的权力干预。我们要坚定地批判这种短视，并要求制度性的改变。好了，下面我们来看看许成刚教授对这个问题的观点。
From Zhejiang and then spread out to many other places. So this turns out is so important. So, the same story goes also to the globalization, including these special economic zones, things like that. So that turns out saved the communists. So in 1992, Deng Xiaoping had a conclusion. Since the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, so by that time, all the former Soviet Union and Central Eastern European communist regimes collapsed. And the Chinese communists found threatening. And Deng Xiaoping concluded at that time that the reason they failed is because their economic reform failed. So Deng Xiaoping believed that as long as the Chinese economic reform succeed, then the party rule will be saved. And it turns out, indeed, because of this regional competition facilitated by this red institution, saved the Chinese communist rule. So associated with the fast growth of the private sector, temporarily, the Chinese institution unintentionally shifted from totalitarian to authoritarian, means the control was loosened to some degree. So then there was a booming of the civil society and limited pluralism, things like that. However, the goal of the communist reform is for sustaining the Communist Party's power. It's the same as the Soviet communists. So then they have always faced this fundamental dilemma. So on the one hand, retaining power is the most important. On the other hand, saving the economy is necessary for retaining power. So, but saving the economy, turns out private sector is the key. But once you have private sector, then you have civil society. And that is going to erode the power of the communists. Moreover, the communists also believe that the state sector is the foundation for the communist rule. They have been talking about this explicitly year by year, so all the time. So they worried about the further expanding of the private sector. So then here, the bottom line is that the party must maintain that it controls everything. So then here we have this the reversal starting from 2013. So the last page. So now let me just give a very brief summary of this talk. So the first is that the Chinese totalitarian institution was transplanted from the Soviet Union. And even today, is still there. So not only the party controls everything, actually, there is a complete state ownership of the land, and a nearly complete state ownership of the banking, and the complete state ownership of all the commanding heights sectors. Through these channels, it guarantees that the party controls everything. And second is that the Chinese Communist Party's reform, in terms of their objective, is never been changed. It's the same as those of the Soviet Union and Central Eastern European communists, which is holding the power of the communists. And that is more important than the economy. The economy is very important for surviving, but holding power is the goal, is the objective. And so that is the reason why they resist the privatization. And here I also have to have a caveat. When I talked about China's private sector, and sometimes I use the term privatization for making the presentation clear, but if we are using the Chinese language, privatization is a taboo, even today. So never ever been changed. And there is no Chinese language about the private sector. They don't use the term private. So they use the other terms because private is going to be in contradiction to their ideology. And so here I would argue that the regional administered totalitarian regime facilitated this kind of institution, facilitated regional competition, and that actually lead to unintentional large-scale privatization and globalization. So that pushed economic growth and saved the communist rule. However, the Communist Party, their fear of a peaceful evolution means changing gradually into capitalism and party losing the power. So then they decided to crack down the private firms, crack down, purge entrepreneurs, and the private sector shrink and the state sector enlarge. And consequently, we observe the reduce of the globalization level and the private investment drop, and the state sector investment goes up, shoot up, and associated with the enlarging of the state sector, the soft budget constraint issue becomes much more severe. So consequently, not only there is a slowdown of the growth, but the debt level shoot up. So actually, China is experiencing a controlled financial crisis currently. So then China's trajectory is somewhat similar to that of former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe in the 1980s. So then people would want to see what is the perspectives, what is the future of China. So because here, when we talk about the 1980s, Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, then 10 years later, they all collapsed. So would China collapse? So here, my answer is that the collapse of Soviet Union and Central Eastern European communist regimes is not only because of the economic troubles. There are other things. So here, when we compare in other aspects, we find that the institutional genes in China in many other